Thank you, Joanne. I'm hoping that the changing political landscape where it's now has a lot more women in it will just change the way we value women's work per se, because for too often it's not just your sector, it's nurses and teachers as well. It's like, well, women do those jobs because they love doing them, and you're like, also we'd like to be paid decently for it as well. You know, those things aren't mutually exclusive. So I'm hoping that that changes, which is why it gives me such great pleasure to announce our next speaker, who was kind of the beginning of the change, if you like, Cathy McGowan. So in 2013, Cathy achieved the impossible by breaking the Liberal National Coalition's stranglehold on the seat of Indi. Yes, she knocked off a woman, but that woman was Sophie Mirabella. Becoming the first independent member for the seat and the first female independent to sit on the cross bench in our federal parliament, and what a lovely floodgate she opened. And she achieved it not through buckets of money and a posse of professional campaigners and political diehards orchestrating her every move. It was a grassroots up campaign. She listened to her community, she mobilised local support on the issues, and she took it to Canberra. And we're not talking about a one-hit wonder here, with 2 terms served and the baton now firmly passed to the next independent member for that electorate, Dr Helen Hayes, and a wave of teal sweeping over our federal parliament. Cathy's going to share with us the power of communities to cut through, make a difference and change institutions, even when those institutions are as old, pale-male and stale and seemingly immovable as our parliamentary system. Welcome, Cathy.
And if you haven't already done it, could you just turn to the person beside you and just say hello, and where you're from, and what do you want to get out of, one thing that you want to get out of today. Just a quick chat. Hello, Paul. Okay, that might do. I'll call you in, because there's going to be more chance for this. Wow. Okay, we've got so much to talk about, and I hope that in my keynote speech this morning I can stimulate a lot more conversation. But I've got a particular audience in mind. Can you put your hand up if you come from rural and regional New South Wales or Australia? Oh my word, big high, wow. And if your Member of Parliament, federal Member of Parliament is a National Party MP, can you keep your hand up? Well, not so many of you. Got your eye on you guys. Okay, so when Joanne asked me to come today, she said she wants a story of optimism. So that's my job. She wants me to tell a story of community, and that Margaret Mead statement, never doubt the power of a small group of people to change the world, because in fact, that's the only thing that ever had. So she asked me to tell a story of, did I say optimism? She asked me to talk about a community and communities changing the political landscape. Not being victims, not going in government and hand out to the government saying we want more, to saying, it's us, we're the boss. She wanted to tell me a story about this quote, that the future is not a destination. The future's not predetermined. And in fact, the pathways to the future are not found. The pathways to the future are made. And the making of those pathways changes both the destination and the makers. So don't believe anything's predetermined. There's no such thing as the future. There's everything about us making our own pathways. She asked me to talk about the story of a group of people who decided to be the change rather than trying to change others, to be the change. And she asked me to talk about this lovely saying that Sophie Scomps, the member for McKellar, constantly reminds me of, that there's no cavalry coming over the hill to rescue us. If it's going to be, it's actually going to be us. So that's what I'm going to talk about 15 minutes, and then we've got time for questions, and then we're going to have a panel. And then you've got 2 whole glorious days to explore some of these thoughts. But I'm pretty humble in being here because though that introduction talks about me, in fact, it was never about me. I just happened to be the public face. It was actually about, in my instance, first there was 12, then there was 150, and then there was 500. And when Helen Haynes ran her campaign in 2022, there was about 2,000 people. So that's a lot of leadership, isn't it? I just happened to be the particular face. But I do this with great humility because I know it wasn't about me. So I'm going to begin with the end in mind, which is the call to action. If the change is going to happen, it's going to take your voice, your vision, and your values. If the change is going to take place, we've got to be purposeful, which is vision. And so that's what I want you to know. Like, there was nothing that we did in Indi that Zali Stegel did in Warringah or any of the other people did that wasn't about being purposeful. We set a clear task, a clear vision, and with clear values. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. But to make it help you with we've set up a web page, which is called the Community Independence Project. www.communityindependence.com.au, community independence, easy. And there's a whole lot of resources on that page, which is the end result of where I'm going. So, what's the story I want to tell you, this optimistic story? I want to talk about how things start and where we are now. So it's a bit of a trajectory. And then I want to talk about the meaning that we made from it. So it started by an enormous amount of dissatisfaction, disengagement, disillusionment. We knew things weren't working for us, which is exactly what Joanne's just said. Like, And a group of us thought, well, you keep knocking your head against a brick wall and it hurts. You can still do that, but hey, why not stop and try something else? And we all knew that in theory, but none of us really wanted to do the work because we were safely, happily comfortable. And it wasn't until a group of young people called us to action that really got us off our butts because we were comfortable. So the young people rang up and said they were Indi young people who lived in northeast Victoria. So the towns of Wodonga, Wangaratta, Benalla, Mansfield, just to the peri-urban edge of Melbourne. All the snowy mountains of Victoria, Falls Creek, Hotham. So that's sort of Indi. And 50% of the water in the Murray-Darling Basin falls in that electorate. So it's got a lot of rain at the moment. Anyhow, this group of our biggest export for a long time, and those in the country will know, our biggest export is our young people. They get up and go. Large numbers of them. So the population demographic from sort of 18 to about 50, zips like that. We don't have young people go. So this group of young people were in Melbourne, had gone to our local schools, and as many of the Victorian kids, and I'm sure New South Wales kids do when they go to the city, they get into share houses together and they keep in touch with each other. So these kids, Saturday night, having a little dinner party with the locals. And the conversation must have gone about what were they going to do when they finished uni or whatever they were doing. They weren't going to come home. And they weren't going to come home for very specific reasons. And that was the conversation. And one of those young people, in fact a few of them, but one particular was my niece, and she said to the others, well, you know, my Aunt Cathy, she's a big mouth. You know, she gets around talking a lot. She's got opinions. In fact, I did. I had been president of Australian Women in Agriculture, and like Joe, I'd served on committees, you know, government committees trying to change the system. I'd been in there for years. Anyhow, they rang me up, 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, and said, Cathy, we've worked it out. And I don't know if you any aunties or grand-aunties know when you get that sort of phone call, you've got to listen. Oh yeah, what is it you've worked out? Well, we've worked it out that if you ran as the independent for Indi, we could make the seat marginal. And if we made the seat marginal, we'd no longer be safe and taken for granted. And then if we were a marginal seat, we could get, I'm going to say better, but it's not even better. We could get mobile phone coverage. We could get internet. We could do something about education. We could get the trains to go on time. The trains was a particular bugbear, Melbourne to Albury to Sydney. It was quicker in Ned Kelly's time. True, than it is. It's better now than it was. And these kids always relied on the train because they didn't have cars. And they said, and then maybe someone would listen to us young people around climate change. So that was their agenda. Anyhow, long story short, it was that call to action that made the difference. And one of the things I'm wanting to ask of you today is to hold each other to account, because you don't find that inspiration in yourself. But if you ask somebody else, what are we going to do about it? Truly, my head's sore. So the arrangement was made that eventually I wasn't ever going to run for Parliament, because that's not where you start on this journey, but we would form a committee. So number one thing is you form a committee. You don't have to be the candidate, you don't have to have the solution. You have to have 12, or in this case 11 friends who met, and over a period of 6 months, we were very strategic about our vision. Our vision, and I'm going to come back to that. We had a really clear vision of what we wanted. Well, I'll do it now. We wanted to make the seat marginal. We wanted to use really good community processes in that way of doing it. And we wanted to demonstrate that democracy was alive and well. We wanted to document it so that other people could have access to that information if they needed. So we were clear. We wanted to do something locally, but make it available for others. We had a very clear sense that it was about voice, that our voice wasn't being heard. Not only one voice, but many voices. So we called our organisation Voices for Indi, like deliberate. And we wanted to be values-based, because that's the thing that I think annoyed us most, was the lack of values. And this is in 2012. So we came up with our set of values and agreed behaviours. And anybody who wanted to volunteer had to sign off on those values, like number one rule, and agreed values. And people could, in the beginning, they argued and said, well, why would we do that? We're good people. It's irrelevant, we said. We don't get insurance cover unless you've signed the values. Everyone had to sign the values. And then when we had training workshops, we made sure that the very first thing we did was go through the values and check in that people understood what was expected of them. Now, we brought values up to forefront because we didn't want to get caught in what happens in politics often, is you get dragged into a cesspit of horribleness. We wanted to keep ourselves nice because at the end of the campaign, we still needed to talk and work with each other. So I can cover all this off in a lot more detail for you. In fact, I've written a book. It's called Cathy Goes to Canberra, and it's on audio as well. And I'm giving a copy to Joe, and it's going to be a lucky door prize tonight. But it's around, it tells the story in great detail. So I'll leave that there. But I don't want to go into all the detail. I just wanted to talk to you about clear vision, about voice, and defined values to keep us safe. And in summary about that, it was the values, the agreed values, that was the most useful thing we did. And I know you know this, there's no news in what I'm talking about. But when I became a Member of Parliament, having those clear values and having my community hold me to those values kept me safe in so many circumstances. There were so many opportunities when I could have been, one of our values was respect, and we really talked about what respectful behaviour meant. And so often I was tempted to be sarcastic and to be nasty and to be not hard in politics. And I only had to just do it this much and someone would ring up or text me and saying, and our catch cry was being your best self. Someone would text me, actually Twitter, you weren't your best self there, were you? And I go, oh, no, sorry. And I'd ring up and say, you're right, thank you for reminding me. Or I'd go up the street to do shopping, supermarket, and someone would catch me at Woolies and say, I sent a letter to your office 3 weeks ago and I haven't had a reply. That's not being your best self, is it? Go, thank you, I didn't realise. Go back to the office. We didn't have a turnaround time for correspondence. So out of respect for the people, we put a turnaround time in. Everything had to be answered within 3 days, first off, and then 2 weeks for the final. So respect of others made me a much better politician. Anyhow, I don't want to talk about that too much because what I'm really wanting to talk about is what happened next. Because there's the political story, like clearly it worked. The community came on board, they loved it, they got organised. And it was because they too got the vision. Now, not everybody got the vision of a safe seat or a marginal seat. Everyone got the vision of having voice. And my commitment was I would engage with people. And we practiced that as part of the campaign. So we didn't just say we would. We began with what we called the kitchen table conversations and processes for engagement, of empowering people, and people liked the taste of it. And they said, okay, well, I'm prepared to go out and do some political work to get you elected. So that engagement process worked. But giving voice, it was the magic of when I was a Member of Parliament. People would say, but how can you represent everybody? And I'd say, well, it's not hard. I am not the voice. The community's the voice. So what we were able to do is someone would come in and say, we've got a problem with always the train, but let's say public housing. Public housing is a state matter, not a federal matter. A person would come into the office and I'd say, yes, I can hear you. They'd tell me the problem. I can hear you've got a problem. And then they'd say, well, what are you going to do about it? And I said, well, actually, I'm not actually going to do anything about it, but I will work with you to do something about it. And here's a sheet or here's a process. You go and, number one thing, get a group organised. And when you've got the group organised, come back and talk to me. Because I can't do it by myself, but I will work with you on it. So the group would go away and they'd come back with a big process of describing the problem. And I go, yeah, I can hear the problem, but I can't do anything about that. And if you haven't got a solution, I just go to government describing the problem. And guess what government will do? They'll make up a solution. And that solution won't work. We know it. The only way we're going to do this is if you come up with what you think is going to work. So I'm going to just stop there a little bit because you know all this. We came up with what we called acupuncture politics. You heard this phrase? So this was a little technique we used when people would come with me and describe it, and the problem's always too big. So I'd say to the community, form a little group, come back, and they'd come back and describe the problem, and I'd go to them, okay, what one thing, if I did or we did, and we did it really well, would make a difference? What one thing? Go away, work on it. When you've worked out that one thing, come back and see me. And they would argue and often the group would fall apart because they could never agree on one thing. But if they couldn't agree on one thing, it never was going to happen. And I call this acupuncture politics because it's a bit like the busyness out here. What one place can I put pressure on? And if I put pressure there, it's going to change the whole system. Only do one thing, no more busy work, and do it well. So when the group had agreed on that one thing, I could then be their representative. And being their representative meant not me. I got them to Canberra. Luckily, it's only 4 hours by car. Introduced them to the relevant people, put them in place for them to set up a strategy. And over the period of time, we ended up setting up all these action groups where people came and did their own political work. Right, so you got a picture? It was a really engaged, fun place to be. And then 2020, we got COVID. I mean, I finished being the Member of Parliament, Helen got elected, people are really happy with what we're doing. 2020 COVID, and I'm sitting at home like so bored, and people saying, well, tell us what's going on. So that's when I wrote the book and thought, okay, it's sort of like a handbook of how to do the politics. The book was launched in December 2020, and my phone started ringing. I go, oh, I'm too busy. I can take one phone call, but each phone call was sort of an hour, too long. And I'd fend them off to my friends, and they'd, it's not working, Cathy. We don't want to have these long conversations. So in February 2021, we had a conference, and we called it the Community Independence Project Conference. And we thought we'd get 50 people who'd come for a weekend Zoom conference to talk about what we'd done. We had 300 from 72 electorates. And that was the beginning, truly, of what became the Teal Wave, or the next edition, because it was all the community work you did, but it wasn't, again, people telling it, it was networking everybody, which is why I want you to talk to each other. So the Zooms were, here's a little bit of content, and then 3/4 of the time was spent talking to everybody else about what were you doing. And what you need to do is you need to get a community group, you need to get your values, you need to get your vision, and you need to work out how to engage with people, how to find voice. So that was the process. Now, I'm not going to say it was the only reason why the result happened so well, but it had everything to do with giving people permission to talk, to network, to be values-based. So I want to that was 2021, and then in 22 we had the election. Now, of the talk we're talking about now about the crossbench, there was something about, I think there's about 14 on the crossbench now, but what you probably don't know was that there were 23 community independent candidates around the country. And even the ones that didn't get elected, there were 6 in the rural areas that made their seats marginal. So community independents ran as candidates and came second, made their seats marginal, and they mostly will run again. Seats like Toowoomba, seats like Shepparton, Bathurst. Where are you guys from? Cowper, seats like Cowper, Page. So there's this movement in the country, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'm getting close to the final bit of what I wanted to say, is that not only is this conference timely, you can choose to be victims to government. You can choose to keep hitting your head against the brick wall and saying it's hurting. Or you can say, Sydney, 2020, we stopped. We used our democracy to do what it needs to be done. Now, I know that's an outrageous thing to say to an independent, not-for-profit, mostly funded by government sector. But until you actually find your community power, until you actually find your voice and start living your values and being the change, I don't mean until, I mean when you do that, an amazing thing happens in your community. Our young people are coming back. Our train's fixed up. We've got mobile phone coverages almost everywhere. We've got almost good internet, like not done, but really moved the dial. So what I wanted to, when Joanne said, will I come today, I so wanted to be here because I have watched in my own community the failure of government, absolute failure of government, to deliver services that are applicable to the needs of my community. And I watched over COVID the hollowing out of the values of government. You know, the failure to give decent support to people on casual wages, that what we did to those students who are international students who stayed here. Like, we got out there and we did fundraising in our own community because government wasn't doing it. But you know what I'm talking about. Now, the future doesn't have to be like that. We can make new paths. And I so know it can happen because 2,000 people did it in Indi. Helen Haynes got elected the 4th time in our electorate that we've elected of independent, increasing majority. And not only did she get elected, she then went to Parliament and made the Labor Party introduce a really good integrity bill, which they would have done it, but it would have been down here, I'm sure. But it's up there. So it's not just having women in Parliament, because they can't do it by themselves. You've got to have community. So I'm going to finish my presentation there. I would encourage you to buy the book and get group discussions happening about it. But more importantly, New South Wales state elections are coming up, March. Now, you don't have to be the candidate, but you and your organisations need to be on someone's team. And if there's no team running, then call some friends together. And don't let that little voice in your ear, and I'm nearly finished, Dee, don't let that little voice in your ear say, oh, I'm a public servant, I can't do it. Every one of the 12 in the organisations when we started all had some form of public connection. We all knew we would get into trouble, and we got into trouble. And in the consequence, no one died. Maybe some of us lost our jobs. Well, I got a new job. Other people got new jobs. But, you know, that was all good because we were scared of losing our government contracts and stopped us doing stuff. So we had to face up and talk about that. But the consequences, the benefit of us actually learning about voice, learning about vision, but the most empowering thing was to be the change we wanted to see.
Thank you, Cathy. And I think there were some very wise words there. And I always say to people when they come to me and they say, oh, we need this to happen, it's a really good cause. You go, politicians, and I'm not saying they're bad people, but they've got a lot of good causes, and what motivates them is votes. So if you're in a community and you can say, this cause is so important that this many people in the community care about it, all of a sudden, you've got their attention. Now we're going to ask if anyone here has questions for Cathy. We have a microphone, so please just put up your hand if you have any questions for Cathy. Yeah, we have one at the back here.
Hi Cathy, Zach from Manning Valley Indigenous Community Support Services. And I have a challenge about calling our MPs into action. Recently we have launched a lot of initiatives, we've gotten the numbers together, the community together, and then the MPs turn around and go, oh, not my area, oh, you're on the border, oh, it's not our jurisdiction. So how can we challenge that? Because calling them to action is one thing, but getting action is another.
What was your name?
Zach.
So I've given up on trying to change other people. Quite frankly, I'm 68, not going to do it. So stop trying to change other people. You be the change.
Well, that's the point, we're trying.
Well, it's not a matter of trying, just excuse me being really frank about it. It's a matter of doing it. What electorate are you in? If your MP is not representing you, do something about it. That was the whole point of my story. Our MP wasn't representing us. So we decided to form a group, Voices for Indi, to run a campaign to make the seat marginal. And guess what? We discovered that the whole community wanted the same thing. They wanted something better. So that's the only thing I know that works, is becoming, I'm going to call it political, but it's actually using your democracy. And if your democracy is not working for you, well then that's because you're not using it. And it takes leadership, Jack. Like, we went out there and organised. So I'm not quite sure whether I can't tell you any more than that. Is that sort of clear? Does someone else want to have a go at saying it in a much more frank way? Like, if your Member of Parliament is meeting with you and not doing what you ask, and they're giving you excuses, you've got a choice. And that's why I wanted to talk about acupuncture politics. You can't do a lot. If you do busy work, you're too tired. But just doing one thing and doing it well. So the one thing we decided to do was run an election campaign. And we didn't expect to win, but we thought the competition in the system would make a difference. The winning was a surprise. But the 2022 election showed that it shouldn't have been a surprise, because the feeling in Australia is everybody wants something better. And we did another community independence conference in August, and we had 500 people at that one from 100 electorates. So clearly there's a movement in Australia to do things better. So that's my sense. If you're having a meeting with your Member of Parliament and you're listening and they're not listening to you and you're hearing it, you go away and you say, well, what are we going to do about this? How do we use our democracy? But you can only do one thing. And you've got to have a really good conversation with your team about what one thing, if we did really well, would make a difference. So it might not be running a candidate in your electorate. There might be something else that you could do. But that's the story I wanted to tell you about, for me, I had no idea how useful it was to run a political campaign and hold our federal member to account. And I was surprised I hadn't realised it 30 years earlier.
We have a question up there.
Hi, I'm Margaret from West Ayr. Sorry, there's feedback on the mic. And I'm also chair of the Neighbourhood Centres in New South Wales. Firstly, thank you for actually replying to a letter in a decent time frame, but even sending a letter of reply. I've also taken the attitude recently that as taking a government contract, I shouldn't be treated any differently than if I was I was Transurban or another big corporation. I'm taking a contract and master and servant old relationships, and I shouldn't be treated any differently. I command the same respect that I should, taking 500,000 from $1 billion. And I think that's some of the attitude that we need to take, whether it be a human services contract or a for-profit contract.
So Margaret, to me that question is, it's about your values. Once you've got your values clear, it enables you to make those decisions about what contracts you take and how you live them out. But having that argument in your own board about what is our value, and what are the behaviours that go with its values. So having that conversation with your board is really important, because then that liberates you. If our values X and our behaviours are Y, then that liberates you to actually go and argue about a contract or not accept the contract. But I just want to tell you one quick story about, sometimes the answer is not running politics, sometimes the answer is legal action. And I was really interested during the campaign 2020, like clearly I'm a politics nerd, but watching what was happening in Melbourne. So it goes to pushback. So what happened in Melbourne in Goldstein is there was a whole lot of different rules in Victoria to New South Wales about where you can put your posters up, your core flutes. Anyhow, all these core flutes went up and Bayside City Council said you're not allowed to do it. Take them all down. Put out an official letter. And all the poor old volunteers went, oh my God, we're not allowed to do it, we're going to get fined. So they all panicked and pulled down. The people behind Zoe Daniels' campaign said, that's not right, we are allowed to do it, we're going to take that case to court. So they put out do one thing and do it really well. So very early in the campaign, they took that case to court. Like they put out a call, got money, got some in-house but free legal advice, took the case to court, got an injunction on their side. So sometimes, and that made such a big impression that not only did they show that the council was wrong and they couldn't do it, but also it showed the community that these people were prepared to take action, to use the legal remedies that we've got to protect them. And they'd happened 3 or 4 times, there were court cases in Melbourne. So I just love it when communities actually find their mojo and go, here's our values, that's wrong, we're going to go to court about this. And they go to court and they win. Doing one thing and doing only one thing and doing it really well can change the whole body. But doing a lot of busy work out here, you know, it doesn't work, and people just can't, another word doesn't work. Well, stop doing it if it's not working. Do something that works.
Do you have any other questions? Yes, we do. Down here with the red. So we'll just go lady with the red first and then you.
Hi Cathy, Michelle Rogers Nangajarjan from Lismore, Northern New South Wales. Cathy, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thanks for your time, and I really appreciate your sharing. I'm just wondering if there's opportunity to think about, or what your experience might have been around being pro-community and apolitical. Is there space to represent community without having to step into the political arena, in your view?
Was your question, is it possible to be pro-community and anti-political?
Well, apolitical, as in sit in neutral space politically. I'm thinking of it in terms of Indigenous communities. We are a communal people. We speak as a community for a community.
Well, I don't really know the answer to that. I can't say, because I don't know your circumstances, but I do know that I have spent about 40 years of my life advocating on behalf of rural women. And we'd go to Canberra and we'd just be always asking the government to treat us better. Come on, please, don't ignore us, da-da. It made no difference. We did everything we could think of, like all this busy work, getting equal numbers of rural women on agricultural boards, and we tried. But I tell you what, when we became political, it changed. And I was at a meeting of another, down in Melbourne, in the Dandenong Ranges. There's a community independent candidate running there in the seat of Cathy. And we had a Sunday afternoon barbecue, and I was the guest speaker there during the campaign. And afterwards I went outside, there were smokers, and there was people there chatting. And one of the older women, she said, "Cathy, thank you." She said, "I never realised that being political was what I was always doing. But I didn't, it was just ineffectual political. But now getting involved in this campaign, I can see that my politics is going to make a difference." And it had a profound impact on me, because I think I'd always been political, but I'd been a good girl political, trying not to overstep the line. And I didn't even know where the line was of being community non-political or apolitical and being political. But I don't think it exists anymore. I think it's about being, I'm going to call it being a good girl and not stirring the system up enough. But once we decided to actually use our democracy and our voting, which is our legal right to make our voices heard and live our values and be the change, like that was political. And then we did it in such a way that people loved us for it. Like we kept ourselves nice, we lived to our values. So we didn't actually sell out our soul by becoming political. And I just have to tell you, I just cannot believe how powerful this is. I hope you're hearing it. It doesn't work if it's false. It has to be authentic. You have to do the work. You have to live your values. But on Saturday morning, me and my niece, who's got a disability, were having a coffee in Wodonga. And we said, that's all fine. So my niece is sitting across, and a woman comes across and gives her a hug. So she's been a teacher at Moira's school. And I just thought, isn't that lovely that Moira is so loved in a community that she gives a hug? So that's fine. And then the teacher came, I'm going to cry. The teacher came around to me and she said, "Now I want to give you a hug." And I said, "Oh, what have I done?" And she said, "You've always been so lovely." And she just, I go, "Ah." But it just absolutely made me realise that being the change was what made the difference.
Thank you, Cathy. I think you have answered my question without meaning to.
Yeah.
Now we've just got time for one more question over there.
Hi, Cathy. My name's Abra. I work with migrant and refugee communities in southwest Sydney. So just talking about what the Teal Independent did, but also what happened in the Fairfield with Christina Keneally. Is there, the playbook is the same for if you're trying to change a safe Labor seat, or where these multicultural communities, where they're taken for granted as well by Labor, but the policies might, the candidate gets lost in factional politics and they don't represent the community? Could something be similar to be done in the other left side politics?
Oh, I'm sure. And I think that's what happened in Fowler with Di Lee. The community said, "Nah, it's not going to, nah, don't think so." So they got organised. So, but it's not only about politics, but what's dawning on me is the power of our democracy and how we've been the construct has only some people can play the game of democracy. Whereas in fact it's for all of us. And I don't think it really matters whether you join a party. I'm not anti-parties. But when the party's not working for you, then you've got to use the competition that's built into the system of democracy to make it work, which is what those young people did. They realised that if they got involved in politics and made the seat marginal, things would happen. And then they decided that I was the one. So that's how it works. But I think lots of us put up with our substandard democracy because we don't actually want to make the competition work. And the competition doesn't actually have to be ugly. And in Indi, the competition's not ugly. It's actually wonderful.